Stop for a moment. There is something painful you may have felt before, but never fully named. You send a message that matters to you, and the reply is short, cold, or late. You open your heart about something heavy, and a few days later, the other person speaks as if the conversation never even happened. You go through something difficult, and deep down, you keep hoping that someone will notice, someone will ask, someone will care enough to see that you are not okay. But nothing happens, and that silence can hurt more than words. Not because people are always cruel, not because the world is always heartless, but because in that moment, you are forced to face something most people spend years avoiding. Other people are not thinking about you nearly as much as you think they are. That truth lands hard. It can feel insulting. It can feel lonely. It can feel like the floor under your life just moved. Because many people do not realize how much of their emotional world has been built on one quiet hope. The hope that someone will notice. The hope that someone will remember. The hope that someone will finally confirm that they matter. And when that confirmation does not come, the pain is not small. It reaches deeper than disappointment. It touches identity. You start wondering if you are forgettable, if you are too much, if you are not enough, if your pain matters less than you thought. But Stoicism asks us to look at this moment differently, not with bitterness, not with self-pity, and not with the dramatic conclusion that no one loves anyone and nothing means anything. Stoicism asks for something harder and cleaner. It asks you to separate pain from illusion. The Stoics understood that suffering grows when we place our inner stability in things that do not belong to us. Not only money, not only status, but also approval, attention, recognition, the memory other people keep of us, the place we imagine we hold in their minds. Epictetus opened his Enchiridion with a line that still cuts through confusion centuries later. Some things are in our control and others not. That single idea changes everything, because the attention of others is not in your control. Their timing is not in your control. Their emotional depth is not in your control. The way they interpret your worth is not in your control. And if you try to build peace on top of those things, your peace will shake every time they do. That is why this realization, painful as it is, can become the beginning of freedom. The day you realize that people are not watching you as closely as you feared, not carrying you as deeply as you hoped, not organizing their lives around your existence the way your wounded mind sometimes imagined, is not the day your life becomes meaningless. It may be the first day your life becomes your own, because once the imaginary audience begins to disappear, something unexpected happens. You breathe differently. You stop performing quite so much. You stop explaining every part of yourself. You stop waiting for permission quite as often. You stop handing your value to people who were never qualified to hold it in the first place. And slowly, maybe for the first time, you begin to ask a different question. Not, who cares enough about me? But, why did I ever place so much of myself in hands that were never under my control? That question is uncomfortable, but it is honest. And honesty is where strength begins. Marcus Aurelius warned against placing your happiness in the souls of other people. He understood something most of us only learn through disappointment. The more your peace depends on being remembered, praised, chosen, or emotionally carried by others, the more fragile your peace becomes. So this video is not about becoming cold. It is not about pretending you do not need love. It is not about acting superior because you have been hurt. It is about waking up. It is about seeing clearly that most human beings are overwhelmed by their own fears, their own desires, their own unfinished pain. And once you truly understand that, you stop taking every absence as a verdict on your value. You stop reading every silence as proof that you are unimportant. And from that moment on, your life begins to change. Not because the world suddenly becomes kinder, But because you stop asking it to carry a burden it was never meant to carry, you stop asking strangers, lovers, friends, family, and passing audiences to tell you who you are. And you begin the harder work, the Stoic work, the work of returning to yourself. The hardest part is not always the silence. It is not the missed message, not the forgotten detail, not even the moment when someone clearly shows you that what felt important to you did not stay important to them. The hardest part is what that silence touches inside you. Because when someone forgets you, ignores you, overlooks you, or responds without care, the pain is rarely just about that one moment. It reaches further in. It touches the place where you have quietly tied your worth to their attention. That is why two people can experience the same thing and feel it completely differently. One person is disappointed, but steady. The other collapses inside. One person thinks, "That hurts, but it does not define me." The other thinks, "This must mean I do not matter." And that difference matters, because it reveals something most people never stop to examine. The event is painful, yes, but the event alone is not what destroys your peace. What destroys your peace is the meaning you built around it. Maybe you told yourself that if they cared, they would remember. If they loved you, they would notice. If you mattered, they would check on you. If you were enough, they would not be so casual with your heart. And once those ideas settle deep inside, every delayed reply becomes more than a delay. It becomes evidence. Every forgotten promise becomes more than forgetfulness. It becomes a verdict. Every moment of emotional absence becomes a sentence against your value. This is where suffering becomes heavier than reality, because now you are no longer dealing only with another person's limitation. You are dealing with your interpretation of that limitation. You are carrying the event, and then carrying the story you told yourself about the event, and then carrying the fear that the story might be true. That is why it feels unbearable. A lot of people spend years trapped here. They are not simply wanting love. They are trying to survive on signs, en réponse, en attention, on emotional proof that they are seen enough, wanted enough, remembered enough, valued enough. And when that proof fades, they panic, not because they are weak, but because somewhere along the way, they learned to look outside themselves for confirmation that they are real. That is a painful way to live, because attention is unstable. People pay attention when they are lonely, when they need something, when they are in the mood, when life is quiet, when it is convenient, when they have energy, when they are emotionally available enough to give it. And then life changes. Their stress returns. Their mind turns inward. Their priorities shift. And suddenly, the same attention that once made you feel safe begins to disappear. If your worth was sitting inside that attention, then your worth disappears with it. Or at least it feels that way. This is why Stoicism matters here. Stoicism does not tell you to stop feeling. It does not tell you that neglect does not hurt. It does not ask you to pretend that disappointment is pleasant. It asks something more honest. It asks you to stop placing your inner life in unstable hands. Marcus Aurelius warned against placing your happiness in the souls of other people. That idea is not abstract. It is deeply practical. It means this: the moment your peace depends on how often someone remembers you, how warmly they respond, how visibly they care, how consistently they choose you, you have handed them power they never asked for and can never carry well. Even good people cannot carry it, because no human being is steady enough to be the container of your worth. Some people love you and still forget things. Some people care about you and still fail you. Some people mean well and still do not show up the way your heart hoped they would. That does not always mean they are false. And it does not automatically mean you are unimportant. Sometimes it simply means they are limited. But if you do not understand that, you will keep taking human limitation as spiritual rejection. And that confusion will poison your relationships. You will overread every silence, overinterpret every change in tone, overinvest in every sign. You will become hyper-aware, hypersensitive, hyper-dependent on tiny shifts in other people's behavior, not because you are dramatic, but because your nervous system has learned to search for worth in places where worth can never be guaranteed. And this is where the Stoic turn begins. It begins when you stop asking, "Why didn't they care enough?" and start asking, "Why did I put so much of myself inside their caring?" That question is not self-blame. It is self-recovery. It is the beginning of taking your life back. Because once you ask it honestly, you begin to see things more clearly. You begin to see that you were not only hurt by people, you were also hurt by dependence, by expectation, by the quiet hope that someone else's consistency would finally make you feel secure. But security, built on other people's attention, will always tremble. Today they notice. Tomorrow they do not. Today they reassure you. Tomorrow they disappear into their own problems. Today they make you feel chosen. Tomorrow they are distracted, tired, unavailable, overwhelmed, or changed. And if your worth rises and falls with each of those movements, then your life will never feel stable. You will always be one reply away from relief, and one silence away from collapse. No soul can live well like that. This is why the real pain is deeper than neglect. The real pain is misplacement. You placed your value where it did not belong. You placed your peace in a room you did not own. You placed your identity in the memory, mood, and emotional capacity of other people. And that is too fragile a foundation for a human life. Epictetus taught that some things are in our control and others are not. Most people hear that and think about money, status, or success. But this truth goes much further. Another person's attention is not in your control. Their timing is not in your control. Their emotional maturity is not in your control. The depth of their understanding is not in your control. The place they give you in their mind is not in your control. So, if you keep building your worth there, you will keep suffering there. Not because the world is cruel beyond measure, but because you keep kneeling before what was never yours to command. And this is where freedom begins to whisper, not loudly, not dramatically, but clearly. If their attention cannot define you, then their absence cannot erase you. If their memory cannot create your worth, then their forgetfulness cannot destroy it. If their care is real, let it be a gift, but never make it the source of your existence. That is too much weight for any person to hold. The mature soul learns to receive love without building identity out of it, to welcome care without becoming dependent on it, to appreciate being remembered without falling apart when others are distracted by their own lives. This does not make you cold. It makes you anchored, and once you become anchored, something changes. You stop chasing emotional proof everywhere you go. You stop begging silently to be seen. You stop treating every person as a mirror that must reflect value back to you before you can believe you have any. Instead, you begin to stand differently. You begin to understand that being forgotten by someone does not mean you are forgettable. Being overlooked does not mean you are without worth. Being unmet does not mean you are empty. It may only mean that you have been asking the wrong place to tell you who you are. And that is painful to realize. But it is also powerful, because once you see the real wound, you can stop treating the symptom and start healing the source. Not by becoming bitter, not by pretending not to care, not by withdrawing into pride, but by slowly taking your worth out of other people's hands and returning it to the only place it can ever be held with stability. Within your own character, within your own choices, within the way you live, act, endure, and remain true when no one is watching. That is where Stoicism begins, not in detachment from humanity, but in detachment from dependence. And once that lesson enters your life, the silence of others may still sting sometimes, but it will no longer get to decide who you are. There is a difficult truth that hurts at first, because it removes one of the mind's favorite illusions. Most people are not watching you as closely as you think. They are not replaying your words the way you replay them. They are not studying your choices the way your anxiety imagines they are. And they are usually not carrying your pain in the center of their mind for very long, even when they care. Not because people are evil, not because everyone is fake, not because human connection means nothing, but because every person is standing inside the noise of their own life. They have their own fear, their own regrets, their own unfinished conversations, their own private shame, their own pressure, their own bills, disappointments, distractions, hopes, habits, wounds, and cravings. And most of the time, people are moving through the day trying to manage that inner world. That is why the same friend who once listened deeply can forget what you told them. That is why someone can care about you and still fail to show up well. That is why a family member can ask you the same question again and again, as if they never really heard the answer the first time. That is why a person can say they love you and still remain mostly occupied by their own worries. This is one of the most painful things to accept when you are emotionally exhausted. Because when you are hurting, you want your pain to register in people with the same force it registers in you. You want them to remember. You want them to notice the shift in your voice. You want them to see that something is off without having to be told twice. You want your suffering to matter enough to interrupt their routine. And sometimes it does not. That is where resentment starts growing. You begin to think, if I mattered, they would have noticed. If they cared, they would have remembered. If I was important, I would not feel this alone. But Stoicism asks you to step back before you turn another person's limitation into a final judgment about your worth. Because very often, what you are calling rejection is simply human narrowness. Marcus Aurelius spent a great deal of time reminding himself not to become consumed by what other people think, do, or fail to do. He understood that the mind wastes enormous energy when it leaves its own post and wanders into the motives, opinions, and awareness of others. And that is exactly what many people do when they feel ignored. They stop living inside their own mind and begin living inside imagined rooms. They imagine what others must be thinking. They imagine being discussed. They imagine being dismissed. They imagine being judged. They imagine people keeping score of their failures. They imagine everyone noticing their awkwardness, their mistakes, their weaknesses, their changes. But most people are not keeping score. They are trying to survive themselves. That person you think is analyzing you may be worried about money. The one you think is judging your life may be ashamed of their own. The one you think forgot you because you do not matter may simply be overwhelmed, emotionally undisciplined, distracted, exhausted, immature, or trapped in patterns they barely understand. This does not excuse every failure. Some people really are selfish. Some people really are shallow. Some people really do take more than they give. But even then, the larger truth remains. Human beings are mostly preoccupied with their own experience. And once you understand that, many things begin to look different. You stop treating every silence like a message about you. You stop reading every delay as a deliberate insult. You stop assuming that every absence means abandonment. You stop turning the ordinary limits of human attention into a personal tragedy. That shift matters, because one of the quietest forms of suffering is this constant personalization of everything. Someone is distant, and you make it about your value. Someone forgets, and you make it about your importance. Someone is distracted, and you make it about your place in their life. Someone fails to understand you, and you make it about your lovability. And after a while, your whole emotional life becomes a courtroom where every small human failure is treated as evidence against you. That is exhausting, and most of it is unnecessary. The Stoic mind tries to see clearly before it reacts. It asks, what actually happened? What part of this belongs to me? What part of this belongs to the limits of other people? What am I adding through fear, insecurity, and imagination? These questions do not erase pain, but they do prevent pain from multiplying into illusion. And that multiplication is where many people lose themselves. Because reality may only be this: someone forgot, someone was careless, someone was inward, someone did not have the depth you hoped for, someone was there only partially. That is painful enough. But then the mind adds, so I do not matter, so I am forgettable, so I must be too much, so I must not be loved, so I must not be enough. Now the original wound is no longer the whole wound. You have added identity to injury. This is why Stoicism is not cold philosophy. It is protective philosophy. It protects you from making life heavier than it already is. It teaches you that people will often be limited, not because you are worthless, but because they are human, and human beings, even decent ones, are often inconsistent. They care, but imperfectly. They listen, but partially. They promise, then get tired. They love, but through the filters of their fears, their habits, and their unhealed parts. Once you see that clearly, you become less shocked by the world. And that matters, because shock makes people fragile. They expect depth from the emotionally shallow, steadiness from the unstable, memory from the distracted, rescue from the overwhelmed. And when reality fails to match the fantasy, they break inside. But the Stoic path is different. It says, see people as they are, not cynically, not harshly, just accurately. See that most people are carrying themselves, not you. See that they wake up in the center of their own mind, just as you wake up in the center of yours. See that they are not the audience you imagined. They are simply other struggling human beings moving through their own private storms. There is something strangely relieving in that, because once you stop imagining a giant audience around your life, the pressure begins to loosen. You no longer have to perform every emotion perfectly. You no longer have to manage every impression. You no longer have to shape your life around what they might think, because they are usually too busy wrestling with their own existence. That realization can feel lonely at first, because it removes the fantasy that someone, somewhere, is watching closely enough to organize the meaning of your life for you. But that loneliness is not empty. It is honest, and honesty is better than illusion, because once you stop expecting the world to revolve around your inner life, you stop being devastated every time it does not. You begin to see care more clearly too, not as something automatic, not as something owed, but as something rare and meaningful when it is real. A person who truly listens becomes more precious. A person who remembers becomes more precious. A person who asks again, follows up, stays present, and makes space for your reality becomes more precious. Why? Because now you are no longer measuring everyone by the fantasy that they should carry you constantly. You are seeing them more truthfully. And truth, even when painful, has a calming effect. It lowers unrealistic expectation. It reduces unnecessary hurt. It cuts the drama created by the ego's need to be central in every room. Most people are not building their lives around you, and you should be careful not to build yours around them either. That is the deeper lesson. Not that connection is meaningless, not that love is fake, not that no one ever cares, but that your life becomes lighter when you stop demanding centrality in the minds of other people. You are not the main character in their inner world, and they are not meant to be the foundation of yours. Once you understand that, you stop asking the same desperate question over and over. Why am I not more present in their mind? And you begin asking a wiser one. If everyone is busy living their own life, then why am I still living mine as if it belongs to their attention? That is where the next change begins. Because once you see that people are not watching you nearly as much as you feared, you also begin to see something else. The audience you were performing for may never have really been there at all. For a long time, many people do not live in the real world. They live on a stage. Not a stage made of wood and lights, but a stage built inside the mind. On that stage, there is always an audience. Always someone watching. Always someone judging. Always someone noticing every mistake, every awkward moment, every failed attempt, every strange desire, every change in direction. That is why so many people feel tired, even when nothing dramatic is happening. They are not only living, they are performing their living. They are editing themselves while they speak, correcting themselves while they dream, resizing themselves while they move through other people's expectations. They want to say one thing, but they say another. They want to choose one path, but they stay still. They want to try, but they keep waiting. They want to leave, but they delay. They want to become more honest, more original, more alive. But first, they want reassurance that the audience will approve. And so their real life stays trapped behind a false requirement. The requirement to be accepted before they begin. This is one of the quietest prisons in human life. Not chains, not walls, not open cruelty, just the endless pressure of being seen. Or rather, the endless pressure of imagining that you are being seen far more than you really are. Stoicism cuts straight through this illusion. Marcus Aurelius repeatedly brought himself back to the same discipline. Do not be dragged around by opinions. Do not waste your life in the theater of other people's minds. Do not hand your inner government to passing judgments, imagined criticism, or empty fame. That matters because the imaginary audience has enormous power over a person who never questions it. It can stop someone from speaking honestly. It can stop someone from changing careers. It can stop someone from ending a dead relationship. It can stop someone from creating, leading, trying, failing, recovering, and beginning again. Not because the road is impossible, but because the person is haunted. Haunted by, what will they think? Haunted by, what if they laugh? Haunted by, what if I look foolish? Haunted by, what if they do not understand? Haunted by, what if I disappoint the version of me they have grown used to? So they remain loyal to a life that does not fit them anymore, not out of conviction, out of surveillance. And the strange thing is this: most of that surveillance is not real. Yes, sometimes people judge. Yes, sometimes people gossip. Yes, sometimes people misunderstand, mock, dismiss, or reduce you. But not with the intensity your fear imagines, not with the permanence your insecurity imagines, and not with the centrality your ego imagines. Most people are not standing around your life with clipboards. They are trying to survive their own confusion. They are worried about their appearance, their future, their problems, their failures, their image, their pain. They are not carefully documenting your every deviation from normal. And once that truth starts to sink in, something loosens. The stage lights begin to dim. You start to realize that you have spent years rehearsing in front of people who were never really watching. You have delayed decisions for an audience that was mostly absent. You have hidden your nature from judges who were mostly occupied with themselves. That realization can feel embarrassing at first, because it forces you to see how much energy you have wasted, how many words you swallowed, how many ideas you buried, how many changes you postponed, how many parts of yourself you kept hidden so that imaginary people could remain comfortable. You might even feel grief. Grief for the time lost. Grief for the self abandoned. Grief for the life that could have started earlier if you had understood sooner that there was no crowd to impress. But grief can be clean when it leads to truth. And the truth is this: a large part of your fear did not come from reality. It came from mental projection. You projected an audience. You projected scrutiny. You projected memory. You projected condemnation. And then you lived beneath those projections as if they were facts. This is why the Stoics cared so much about judgment. Not because they were cold thinkers detached from ordinary life, but because they understood that human beings suffer not only from events, but from the shape of their thoughts about events. If you think every mistake becomes a public identity, you will stop trying. If you think every awkward moment will be remembered forever, you will become stiff and false. If you think every difference in you must be defended before the world, you will live in apology instead of dignity. But if you begin to see that much of this audience exists only in imagination, then your body changes. You breathe more deeply. You move more naturally. You speak more directly. You stop explaining every choice as if you are on trial. You stop decorating your life for strangers who are barely glancing at it. And in that space, freedom begins. Not loud freedom. Not rebellious freedom for the sake of ego. Not the childish freedom that says, "Then I will do whatever I want." A deeper freedom. The freedom of no longer needing constant permission to exist as you are. That freedom is quiet. It looks like wearing what feels true without overthinking it all day. It looks like beginning a project without first waiting for universal approval. It looks like saying no without writing a long speech to justify it. It looks like changing your direction without asking everyone to understand. It looks like letting people misread you sometimes without collapsing into self-defense. That is not indifference. It is recovery. Recovery from the exhausting habit of turning life into performance. The imaginary audience also distorts your moral life. Because when you live before an audience, you do not ask, "What is right?" You ask, "What will look right?" You do not ask, "What is true?" You ask, "What will be accepted?" You do not ask, "What kind of person am I becoming?" You ask, "How am I being perceived?" And those are not the same questions. A person can look admirable and still be false. A person can look composed and still be ruled by fear. A person can look successful and still be internally dependent on applause. Stoicism does not teach image management. It teaches inner government. That is why this part matters so much. When the imaginary audience begins to disappear, you are finally able to return to reality. Reality is simpler. There is a choice in front of you. There is a principle at stake. There is a fear inside you. There is an action available now. And very often, that is all. Not a courtroom. Not a global referendum on your worth. Not a permanent archive of your awkwardness. Just one life, one mind, one moment, one next step. The imaginary audience turns life into spectacle. Stoicism turns it back into practice. And practice is merciful. You do not have to be universally admired to begin. You do not have to be understood by everyone to act. You do not have to eliminate all criticism before telling the truth. You do not have to control every impression before becoming more fully yourself. You only need to stop kneeling to ghosts. That is what many people have been doing for years. They are terrified of people who are not thinking about them. They are shaping themselves around opinions that were never fully formed. They are living in fear of reactions that may never come. They are making profound life decisions in response to shadows. And shadows should not be allowed to govern a soul. Once you understand this, courage becomes more available. Not because fear disappears all at once, but because the stage begins to empty. There are fewer eyes in your mind, less noise in your decisions, less pressure to maintain a role, less need to keep feeding an image that no longer serves you. Then a new question enters your life. Not, how do I keep everyone comfortable with who I am? But, who am I when I stop performing? That question is sacred, because many people have never truly asked it. They have only asked, how do I stay liked? How do I avoid criticism? How do I keep belonging? How do I avoid embarrassment? How do I remain acceptable? But none of those questions lead to freedom. Freedom begins when the audience fades, and you are left alone with your own conscience, with your own nature, with your own standard, with your own unfinished courage. That is the moment when life stops being theater and starts becoming truth. And yes, that truth can feel lonely, because performance gives people a strange kind of comfort. It gives structure, it gives role, it gives identity through reaction. When that disappears, you may feel exposed at first, but stay there, because on the other side of that exposure is something far better than approval: self-possession. The ability to stand in your own life without narrating it for spectators. The ability to choose without begging for emotional votes. The ability to become more real, not more polished. And that is the kind of freedom no crowd can give you, because it only begins when the crowd in your head finally leaves. Once the imaginary audience begins to fade, a different problem appears. If you are no longer living for their attention, their approval, their memory, their permission, then what are you supposed to live by? This is the moment where many people become confused. They break free from one prison, but because they have no inner structure, they drift straight into another. They stop caring what others think, but then mistake recklessness for freedom. They stop chasing approval, but then confuse numbness with strength. They stop performing, but then do not know how to stand. This is why the Stoic turn matters. Stoicism does not only remove illusions, it gives you a center. It gives you somewhere to return when the noise of other people no longer runs your life. That center is not comfort. It is not praise. It is not image. It is not popularity. It is control, not control over the world, not control over people, not control over outcomes, control over your own inner government. This is where Epictetus becomes so clear and so necessary. Some things are in your control, some things are not. That line is simple, but most people do not really live it. They may understand it with their mind, but the moment life becomes emotional, they abandon it. Someone pulls away, and they panic over what they cannot control. Someone forgets them, and they obsess over what they cannot control. Someone judges them, and they build their whole day around what they cannot control. Someone misunderstands them, and they spend hours trying to manage what they cannot control. And in doing so, they lose the very thing that was actually theirs: their own mind, their own choice, their own direction. This is the heart of the Stoic shift. When you realize other people are not going to carry your worth, you must stop reaching for what is outside you and begin strengthening what is within you. So, what actually belongs to you? Your judgments belong to you, not the event itself, not what others do, not what they fail to do, but the meaning you attach to it. A person forgets to check on you, that is the event. Then your mind says, I do not matter. I am forgettable. I always care more than others. I must not be enough. That second layer is not the event. That second layer is judgment. And judgment is where the Stoic work begins. Because if your judgment is undisciplined, then every ordinary disappointment becomes a wound to identity. But if your judgment becomes clearer, you begin to say, that hurt. That was limited. That may tell me something about them. But it does not get to define my worth. That is not denial. That is strength with accuracy. Your choices belong to you, not whether someone stays, not whether they admire you, not whether they understand your path, but whether you betray yourself to keep them comfortable, whether you remain silent when truth is needed, whether you keep shrinking to preserve approval, whether you continue postponing your real life because someone else may not like it. These choices are yours. And many people do not realize how much power still remains in their hands, because they are too busy mourning the power they never had. They mourn the power to control how they are seen, the power to control how deeply they are loved, the power to control what others remember, the power to control whether they are chosen. But while they are grieving those illusions, they neglect the real authority that still belongs to them, the authority to act with dignity, to speak with honesty, to set a boundary, to begin, to leave, to endure, to continue. Your actions belong to you. This is where life stops being philosophy in the abstract. You may not control whether someone values your effort, but you control whether you keep showing up for what matters. You may not control whether others understand your growth, but you control whether you stay loyal to it. You may not control whether anyone claps when you make a hard decision, but you control whether you make it. This matters because many people secretly believe that if no one notices, an action loses value. If no one praises the discipline, if no one validates the courage, if no one confirms the change, then part of them feels it hardly counts. But Stoicism cuts against that weakness. An act does not become meaningful because it is seen. It becomes meaningful because it is right. That is a very different way to live. It means your standards survive even in private. It means your character is not built from applause. It means your best decisions may happen in silence, with no witness except your own conscience. And that is enough. Your character belongs to you. This may be the most important part of all, because if attention is unstable, and outcomes are unstable, and relationships can be uncertain, then what remains? The answer is character, the kind of person you are becoming. Whether you are honest when lying would be easier. Whether you are restrained when emotion wants to take over, whether you are just when resentment tempts you toward pettiness, whether you are brave when the right thing costs you comfort. This is where Stoicism becomes more than a coping tool. It becomes a way of rebuilding identity from the inside. Not, who am I in their eyes? But, who am I in my choices? Not, how often am I remembered? But, how do I conduct myself? Not, do they see my value? But, am I living in a way that is worthy of self-respect? That is a much firmer foundation, because other people may be distracted. Other people may be inconsistent. Other people may come and go. But if you are rooted in character, their inconsistency no longer decides your center. This does not make disappointment disappear. It simply prevents disappointment from becoming identity. That is a major difference. The undisciplined mind says, "They did not choose me, therefore I am lesser." The Stoic mind says, "They made a choice. Now I must make mine." The undisciplined mind says, "They do not recognize my worth, therefore I have none." The Stoic mind says, "Their recognition was never the source of it." The undisciplined mind says, "I need the outer world to reassure me before I can move." The Stoic mind says, "I move according to what is right, not according to what is echoed back." This is the turning away from helplessness, the turning away from emotional dependence, the turning away from chasing worth through unstable responses, and the turning toward inner rule. When you live like this, life gets quieter, not because the world changes overnight, not because people suddenly become more thoughtful, not because you stop feeling everything. It gets quieter because you stop scattering your energy across things that were never yours to command. You stop waking up and checking your emotional value in other people's behavior. You stop measuring your day by their warmth, their delay, their consistency, their attention. Instead, you ask better questions. Was I honest today? Was I disciplined today? Did I act from fear or from principle? Did I abandon myself to keep peace? Did I stay loyal to what I know is right? These questions return you to yourself, and returning to yourself is the beginning of steadiness. Many people think control means being able to force outcomes. The Stoics knew better. Real control is not domination. It is self-command. the ability to keep your ruling faculty from being kidnapped by every outside movement. A text arrives, or it does not. Someone praises you, or they do not. Someone remembers, or they forget. Someone includes you, or they pass you by. If every one of these movements drags your soul with it, then your life is not your own. But when you return to what is truly yours, something powerful happens. You become harder to shake, not because you are closed, but because you are grounded. You become less dramatic in your suffering, not because you feel less, but because you add less illusion. You become less hungry for attention, not because you no longer value love, but because love is no longer confused with proof of existence. This is the Stoic turn. The moment you stop asking life to hand you security from the outside and begin cultivating it from the inside. And yes, that takes work. It takes repeated correction, repeated remembrance, repeated honesty, because the mind will keep trying to wander outward. It will keep asking, what are they thinking? Why did they do that? Why did they stop? What does it mean about me? And each time, you must gently bring it back. What is in my control here? What can I govern now? What choice belongs to me? What judgment needs correction? What action requires courage? That is the practice. Not glamorous, not loud, not built for performance, but deeply liberating. Because every time you return to what is yours, you take a piece of your life back. And after a while, you no longer feel like a person waiting to be emotionally handled by the world. You begin to feel like someone who can stand, not because others finally got everything right, but because you stopped asking them to be your foundation. And once that happens, the next question becomes unavoidable. If your value no longer depends on their attention, and your direction no longer depends on their approval, then what kind of strength should guide the life you build from here? There is a dangerous moment that comes after a painful realization. It is the moment when truth enters your life, but you have not yet decided what kind of person you will become because of it. You realize people are absorbed in themselves. You realize they do not think about you as much as you imagined. You realize they may fail you, forget you, overlook you, disappoint you, and move on faster than your heart expected. And from that point, two paths open. One path leads downward. On that path, you become bitter. You tell yourself that no one is real. No one is worth trusting. No one deserves your warmth. No one cares. So why should you care? You start calling this strength. But it is not strength. It is injury wearing armor. It is pain trying to become philosophy. It is disappointment hardening into identity. And a lot of people get trapped there. They think they have become wiser, but really, they have only become colder. They think they have become untouchable, but really, they are just afraid of being touched again. They think they are above needing anyone, but deep down, they are still wounded by everyone. That is not Stoicism. Stoicism is not emotional revenge. It is not silent resentment. It is not withdrawal dressed up as superiority. It is not the ego saying, I never needed anyone anyway. The Stoics did not teach people to become smaller, harder, or more cynical. They taught people to become steadier, and steadiness is very different from bitterness. Bitterness closes the heart. Steadiness protects the center. Bitterness says, because I was not carried, I will carry no one. Steadiness says, I will give, but I will not disappear inside what I give. Bitterness says, people are disappointing, so I will stop caring. Steadiness says, people are limited, so I will care without illusions. That difference changes everything. Because once you have been hurt by neglect, it is easy to make a secret vow. A vow that says, I will never need again. I will never trust again. I will never expect again. I will never open like that again. At first, this feels powerful, but over time, it starts to poison you. You become guarded in places where honesty was needed, defensive in places where calm was possible, detached in places where presence could still exist, proud in places where gentleness would have been more mature. And little by little, your pain stops being something you carry. It becomes something you become. This is why this part matters so much, because the realization that other people are not the center of your life should free you. It should not corrupt you. It should make you more grounded, not more suspicious of every human bond. It should make you less dependent, not less human. It should teach you how to stand alone when necessary, without turning aloneness into a religion. That is a much cleaner kind of strength. A stronger kind too. Real strength is not the refusal to feel. It is the refusal to be ruled by what you feel. Real strength is not proving that no one can hurt you. It is remaining decent even after you have been hurt. Real strength is not becoming unreachable. It is becoming anchored, because once you are anchored, you no longer need to swing between extremes. You do not have to beg for attention, and you do not have to despise people for failing to give it. You do not have to build your identity around being chosen, and you do not have to make loneliness your personality. You do not have to idealize others, and you do not have to dehumanize them either. You can simply see clearly. They are human. So are you. They are limited. So are you. They may care, but imperfectly. They may forget, even when they mean well. They may fail to hold what you hoped they would hold. And because you understand that now, you stop demanding from human beings what only inner stability can provide. That makes your relationships cleaner. You stop turning every connection into a hidden rescue mission. You stop expecting every friend, partner, or family member to become the emotional proof of your worth. You stop overloading ordinary people with impossible spiritual responsibilities. And when they do show care, you can finally receive it in a healthy way. Not as oxygen, not as identity, not as the thing that decides whether you matter, but as a gift that changes the tone of your whole life. Because gifts are appreciated, dependencies are feared. When care becomes a gift, you become more grateful. When care becomes a requirement, you become more fragile. This is one of the quiet gifts of Stoicism. It teaches you to stop demanding perfection from human beings so that you can begin relating to them with more truth. You can love people without worshipping their attention. You can value people without asking them to stabilize your soul. You can be disappointed by them without turning your disappointment into a doctrine about life. That is maturity, and maturity has warmth in it. Not softness without boundaries. Not sentiment without discipline. Warmth with clarity. A lot of people never reach that point. They go from dependence straight into emotional exile. They say, "No one cares," and use that sentence to justify distance, superiority, numbness, and isolation. But that sentence is too small to build a wise life on. A wiser sentence would be this: "People cannot carry me the way I once hoped, so I must learn how to stand. And once I learn how to stand, I can meet others without clinging to them." That is stronger than bitterness, because bitterness still depends on the wound. It is still a reaction, still a prison, still another way of being controlled by disappointment. Strength is different. Strength digests the wound, learns from it, refuses to romanticize it, refuses to let it become an excuse, and then moves forward with more truth than before. This also means you stop trying to punish the world for being human. You stop saying, "They did not see me, so I will never be seen again. They did not stay, so I will never stay for anyone. They forgot me, so I will never remember anyone either." That way of living only multiplies emptiness. It does not protect dignity. It corrodes it. Because dignity is not built through emotional withholding. It is built through self-command, through choosing not to become ugly in response to pain, through choosing not to let neglect turn into contempt, through choosing not to let loneliness become cruelty. That is why this realization must be handled carefully. If handled badly, it can turn a person cynical. If handled well, it can turn a person inward in the best way. Not inward in collapse. Inward in grounding. A grounded person does not say, "I need no one." A grounded person says, "I no longer ask others to be what they cannot be for me." That is wiser. That is calmer. That is freer. And from that freedom, something beautiful becomes possible. You start showing up from choice instead of hunger. You start giving from principle instead of desperation. You start loving without begging. You start helping without secretly trying to buy belonging. You start speaking honestly without needing everyone to agree. In other words, you stop using other people to repair your identity. And when that stops, your presence becomes cleaner. Less neediness, less resentment, less hidden demand, more truth, more peace, more quiet strength. This is what pain can become when it is refined instead of worshipped. Not a scar you keep touching for identity, not a story you repeat to justify disconnection, but a turning point, a place where you learned something hard and came out less dependent, more discerning, and still capable of goodness. That last part matters. Still capable of goodness. Because the world does not become better when wounded people become harder. It becomes better when wounded people become wiser. And wisdom knows this. The truth that people are limited should not make you bitter at being human. It should make you disciplined about where you place your peace. It should make you more careful with expectation, more respectful of reality, more anchored in character, and more selective about what you allow to define you. So do not use this truth to shrink your heart. Use it to strengthen your center. Do not use it to become colder than life requires. Use it to become clearer than fear allows. Do not use it to hide behind detachment. Use it to practice inner freedom, because the highest response to disappointment is not bitterness. It is self-possession. And once you have that, you no longer need to harden yourself against the world. You only need to stop handing the world the keys to your inner life. From there, another question rises naturally. If bitterness is not the answer, and if freedom must be guided by something cleaner than reaction, then what kind of inner structure should lead the life you are trying to rebuild? There is a mistake many people make after they wake up. They realize that other people are not thinking about them as much as they feared. They realize they have spent years performing for approval. They realize they have been waiting for permission that was never really coming. And then they say, "Good, I'm free now." But free for what? That is the question. Because if freedom only means, "I will do whatever I feel," or "I answer to no one," or "I no longer care how my actions affect others," then that is not freedom. That is drift. That is ego after injury. That is reaction pretending to be independence. The Stoics were very clear about this. Freedom without virtue is not liberation. It is just another form of disorder. You can escape approval and still be ruled by impulse. You can stop people-pleasing and still become arrogant. You can reject the crowd and still be completely enslaved to anger, pride, appetite, fear, or self-importance. That is why the Stoic path does not end with "stop caring what they think." It continues with a harder question. What kind of person will guide your life now? And the Stoics answered that through 4 central virtues: wisdom, courage, justice, temperance. Without these, a person may feel free for a while, but they will only build a new prison with different walls. Wisdom helps you see clearly before you react, because most suffering becomes worse when the mind interprets too quickly. Someone forgets you, and you call it betrayal. Someone is distant, and you call it proof that you are unwanted. Someone disagrees, and you call it rejection. Someone fails you, and you turn their limitation into a final truth about your value. Wisdom slows that down. Wisdom asks, what actually happened? What is fact? And what is my fear speaking over the fact? Am I seeing clearly or only reacting quickly? Am I looking at reality or at an old wound? This matters because a lot of false freedom begins with false clarity. A person gets hurt and says, I see people for who they are now, but often what they really mean is, I have become less trusting because I am still bleeding. That is not wisdom. That is pain with conclusions. Marcus Aurelius constantly tried to discipline his perception. He wanted to see things stripped of emotional exaggeration, stripped of vanity, stripped of the stories the ego loves to add. That is a powerful practice, because if you do not have wisdom, then every disappointment becomes a worldview. You stop saying, this person was limited, and start saying, people are useless. You stop saying, this hurt me, and start saying, nothing matters. You stop saying, I need to adjust my expectations, and start saying, I should never care again. Wisdom protects you from those false absolutes. It does not ask you to become naive. It asks you to become accurate. And accuracy is mercy. It means you no longer punish yourself with exaggerated meaning. It means you stop making your life heavier through distorted judgment. It means you stop confusing pain with truth. A wise person understands this. Not everyone who forgets you has rejected you. Not everyone who fails you is malicious. Not every silence is a verdict. Not every human weakness deserves a dramatic interpretation. Wisdom brings proportion back, and once proportion returns, the soul can breathe again. Courage lets insight become action. You may understand that people are not watching you as closely as you imagined. You may understand that your worth cannot depend on attention. You may understand that you have been shrinking to stay accepted. But unless courage enters, you will keep doing the same things. You will keep waiting. Keep apologizing for yourself. Keep explaining too much. Keep staying where you have already outgrown. Keep choosing comfort over alignment. Courage is the strength to speak honestly when silence has become a prison. The strength to begin when no one is cheering. The strength to leave what is familiar when it is no longer right. The strength to disappoint expectations that were built on a false version of you. Not dramatic bravery, not spectacle, but moral bravery. The bravery to live without emotional guarantees. To do the right thing without first asking whether everyone will approve. To move toward a truer life even when it costs belonging, comfort, or applause. A lot of people think they are trapped by circumstance. Sometimes they are really trapped by hesitation. They are waiting for one more sign, one more reassurance, one more conversation, one more sign that someone understands. But courage says, begin anyway, not recklessly, not blindly, but faithfully. Faithfully to what you know is right. Justice means you do not make your wound into a weapon. You do not say, because I was neglected, I owe nothing to anyone. You do not say, because I was disappointed, I now have the right to become cold, manipulative, dismissive, or selfish. You do not use your awakening as permission to become smaller in spirit. Justice keeps your freedom from becoming cruelty. This matters because once people stop begging for approval, they often feel a surge of power. And if that power is not guided well, it can turn ugly. They become blunt without kindness, detached without responsibility, honest without compassion, independent without loyalty, proud of how little they need others, but careless in how they treat them. That is not Stoic strength. That is ego enjoying a new costume. Justice reminds you that other people are not merely obstacles in your self-development story. They are human beings. Limited, flawed, distracted, often inconsistent human beings, yes, but still human beings. And so your task is not only to protect yourself, it is also to remain fair, to speak truth without contempt, to set boundaries without humiliation, to leave without malice when leaving is necessary, to stop overgiving without becoming punishing, to stop pleasing without becoming proud. Temperance keeps your soul measured. It keeps you from swinging wildly, from overreaction, from impulsiveness, from emotional extremes, from the hunger to prove, dramatize, or compensate. And after pain, this virtue becomes essential, because once people stop chasing approval, they often want to overcorrect. If they were once too agreeable, they become aggressively dismissive. If they once explained too much, they become proud of saying nothing. If they once feared conflict, they start creating it just to feel powerful. If they once lived for acceptance, they begin performing rejection. But that is still performance, just in the opposite direction. Temperance says, do not overcorrect your way into another form of bondage. You do not need to become harsh to prove you are no longer weak. You do not need to become unreachable to prove you are no longer needy. You do not need to become extreme to prove you are finally free. Measured strength is stronger than dramatic strength. Temperance helps you pause before reacting. It helps you keep dignity when your emotions want revenge. It helps you set a boundary without turning it into theater. It helps you stay calm when your old wounds want to turn every disappointment into a storm. People often mistake intensity for transformation. They think that because they feel powerfully done, powerfully detached, powerfully self-protective, they must finally be strong. But strong is not the same as intense. A storm is intense. A rooted tree is strong. Temperance makes you the tree, steady, measured, difficult to provoke, difficult to seduce into extremes, difficult to derail through every fluctuation of attention, praise, rejection, memory, or neglect. When the four virtues come together, the full picture becomes clear. Wisdom helps you see clearly. Courage helps you act on what you see. Justice keeps your strength from becoming cruelty. Temperance keeps your freedom from becoming chaos. Together, they form an inner structure stronger than approval. The day you realize no one is thinking about you as much as you imagined is not the day you become careless. It is the day you are invited to become governed from within, no longer by fear of opinion, no longer by hunger for attention, no longer by the fantasy of being constantly observed, no longer by the emptiness that comes from living in reaction, but by virtue. And virtue is what makes freedom trustworthy. Without virtue, freedom becomes vanity. Without virtue, detachment becomes avoidance. Without virtue, honesty becomes aggression. Without virtue, self-respect becomes ego. Without virtue, independence becomes isolation. But with virtue, something far better happens. You become a person who can live without constant approval and still remain decent. You become a person who can endure neglect without becoming bitter. You become a person who can be alone without becoming empty. You become a person who can act from principle, even when no one notices. And that is a different kind of power, a quieter one, a cleaner one, a power that does not need display. When people hear a truth like this, they often imagine change as something dramatic. They imagine waking up the next morning as a completely different person, fearless, detached, unbothered, free in a single stroke. But real change is usually quieter than that. It does not arrive like thunder. It arrives like pressure leaving the body, like a room inside you getting less crowded. Because the day you truly realize that other people are not holding your life in their hands the way you feared or hoped, something begins to loosen. Not everything at once, but enough. And that is where change starts becoming real. One of the first things that changes is your mind becomes less crowded by interpretation. Before, a short reply could ruin your evening. A delayed message could trigger old insecurity. A strange tone could pull you into hours of guessing. A forgotten detail could make you question your place in someone's life. But now, something interrupts that spiral. You begin to remember, their behavior is not always a final statement about me. Their inconsistency is not the foundation of my identity. Their attention is not the measure of my worth. That does not make you emotionless. It simply means every small shift no longer becomes a personal crisis. You still notice things. You still feel things. But you do not build an entire inner courtroom around them. That alone changes the texture of daily life. You spend less time replaying, less time decoding, less time trying to read your value through someone else's mood. And when that habit weakens, your energy starts returning to you. You stop chasing emotional proof. Before, part of you may have been quietly asking for proof everywhere. Proof that you matter. Proof that you are remembered. Proof that you are wanted. Proof that your presence leaves a mark. And because you were looking for proof, you were always vulnerable. A warm response lifted you. A cold response reduced you. Being chosen energized you. Being overlooked emptied you. Now that begins to change. You start to see how exhausting it is to keep asking life for reassurance in this form. You start to see that emotional proof is unstable by nature. And because it is unstable, it cannot be the place where you build a solid self. So you stop scanning every relationship for confirmation. You stop secretly asking every room, every conversation, every silence, do I matter here? Do I still matter here? Do I matter enough? That question loses its grip on you, not because you become above human need, but because you begin to feel the cost of living that way. And once you feel that cost clearly enough, you no longer want to pay it. You make decisions faster, not reckless decisions, not dramatic ones, not ego-driven decisions meant to prove that you are finally free. Just cleaner decisions. You stop dragging your life through endless hesitation. Why? Because you are no longer waiting for the emotional vote of invisible spectators. You are no longer asking, will everyone agree? Will this make sense to all of them? Will nobody be disappointed? Will I still be admired if I choose this? Those questions used to slow everything down, not because they were wise, but because they were rooted in dependence. Now you begin asking better questions. Is this honest? Is this necessary? Is this aligned with the person I want to become? Is this fear speaking? Or principle? That changes the pace of your life. You begin ending what needs to end sooner. Beginning what needs to begin sooner. Speaking what needs to be spoken sooner. Not because you are in a hurry, but because you are no longer living under emotional committee review. You become less available for manipulation. People who depend heavily on external attention are easier to control. All someone has to do is withdraw warmth, delay reassurance, create uncertainty, or hint at disapproval, and the dependent person begins to bend. They explain more, try harder, abandon themselves faster, overgive, over-apologize, overcorrect. But once your worth is no longer sitting inside the reactions of others, that mechanism weakens. You stop moving so quickly just because someone pulls back. You stop panicking just because approval is withheld. You stop bargaining with your dignity just to restore emotional comfort. That does not make you hard. It makes you harder to steer through your own insecurity. And that is a real kind of freedom. You begin to respect your own time. When you stop building life around attention, time begins to look different. You start noticing how much of your life was being spent in waiting. Waiting to be chosen. Waiting to be answered. Waiting to be seen. Waiting to feel certain enough because someone else finally responded the right way. And the older that pattern gets, the more tragic it becomes. Because time is one of the few things that truly does leave and does not return. So the day this realization enters deeply enough, you start treating time with more seriousness. You stop spending whole days emotionally paused because someone is unclear. You stop postponing your own work because your mood is hanging on an outside reaction. You stop letting ambiguity swallow your momentum. You return to what is yours to do. That return is powerful, because every time you return to your work, your discipline, your body, your principles, your next right action, you are telling life, I will not keep suspending myself, waiting to be emotionally confirmed. You become more honest. There is a strange link between performance and dishonesty. When people live before an audience, they shape themselves constantly. They soften truths, hide desires, suppress convictions, stay vague to remain accepted, smile when something hurts, say yes when the whole body means no. Not always because they are fake, but because they are afraid. Afraid of disapproval, afraid of being misunderstood, afraid of losing the image others have of them. But when the imaginary audience fades, honesty becomes easier. You say what you actually think more often. You admit what you actually feel more cleanly. You stop wasting words defending your existence. You stop decorating your decisions so they sound harmless to everyone. That honesty is not aggression, it is simplification. Life becomes less tangled because you are no longer maintaining as many false versions of yourself. And that saves enormous energy. Your loneliness changes form. The day you realize that no one is going to carry your life for you is not immediately comfortable. At first, it can feel lonelier because an illusion dies. The illusion that someone, somewhere, is paying enough attention to organize your meaning for you. The illusion that enough love from outside will solve your instability inside. The illusion that being remembered often enough will make you feel real. When those illusions begin to break, there can be grief, real grief. You may feel exposed, less held, less protected by fantasy, less able to comfort yourself with the idea that the world is watching closely. But if you stay with that loneliness long enough, it begins to transform. It stops being abandonment. It becomes space. Space to hear yourself more clearly. Space to notice your own dependence. Space to rebuild your center without constant interruption from other people's reactions. Your loneliness becomes less desperate. It becomes more conscious. And conscious loneliness is often the beginning of inner companionship. You begin to value real care more accurately. When you stop expecting everyone to carry you, you become better at recognizing the few who truly try. Before, your expectations may have been so inflated that even genuine care felt insufficient. You wanted more reassurance, more remembrance, more emotional labor, more proof. But now your eyes become clearer. You begin to notice who really follows up, who really listens, who remembers small things, who shows consistency without being forced, who has the depth to stay present when life is not fun. And because you are no longer demanding the impossible from everyone, the real becomes more visible. That is a beautiful shift. It makes gratitude cleaner. You stop resenting the world for failing to worship your pain and start quietly honoring the few who do show up with sincerity. You stop needing to be the center to feel real. A lot of suffering comes from a hidden desire to matter centrally, to be deeply remembered, closely tracked, emotionally prioritized, impossible to overlook. And while there is a human ache beneath that desire, there is also ego in it. The ego wants to be central in many minds. It wants proof through attention. It wants stability through importance. But real maturity begins when you no longer need to occupy that position in other people to feel anchored in yourself. You become willing to be ordinary in the eyes of many, misunderstood by some, forgotten by others, and still steady. That is not self-erasure. It is freedom from centrality as a psychological addiction, and your life becomes more yours. Not because people vanish, not because you stop loving, not because relationships stop mattering, but because your center begins to come home. You stop outsourcing your emotional foundation. You stop handing the steering wheel to every silence, every look, every message, every delay, every opinion. You begin living from the inside out. That changes everything. Your mornings feel different. Your decisions feel different. Your work feels different. Even your pain feels different. Because pain is no longer mixed with the same degree of illusion. And when illusion decreases, suffering becomes cleaner. Still human, still real, but less tangled. This is what actually changes. Not that you become invincible, not that you stop caring, not that life suddenly becomes easy, but that you become less governed by what never belonged to you. A truth only changes your life when it becomes a practice. Otherwise, it stays a powerful sentence. A moving insight. A video you agree with for one evening, before the old habits quietly take over again. And the old habits are strong. The habit of checking for signs. The habit of replaying silences. The habit of building stories around delays. The habit of placing your peace in attention, memory, response, and approval. That is why Stoicism matters so much here. It does not just tell you what is true. It trains you how to live when that truth is difficult. Epictetus says to meet harsh appearances by telling yourself, you are but an appearance and not absolutely the thing you appear to be. And then ask whether the thing concerns what is in your control or what is not. That is not abstract philosophy. It is a daily method. So, if you really begin to understand that other people are not thinking about you as much as you imagined, here is what the Stoic response looks like in real life. First, interrupt the first interpretation. This is the first discipline, not controlling the event, controlling the first story. A message is ignored. A person forgets. Someone seems distant. A room feels cold. You are left out. You are misunderstood. The old mind reacts instantly. They do not care. I do not matter. I must have done something wrong. I always care more. I am being dismissed. This proves everything I feared. The Stoic pause begins here. Before you believe the first interpretation, stop. Not forever. Just long enough to prevent panic from becoming philosophy. Ask, what actually happened? What do I know for certain? What am I adding? What belongs to them? What belongs to my judgment? This is one of the most protective habits you can build, because many people do not suffer only from life. They suffer from the speed of their interpretation. Second, separate what is painful from what is personal. Something can hurt without being a definition of you. Someone can fail you without announcing your worth. Someone can be careless without proving you are forgettable. Someone can be distracted without that distraction becoming a sentence over your identity. Most people blend these together. Painful means personal. Personal means meaningful. Meaningful means permanent. The Stoic mind untangles that knot. It says, this may be painful, but pain is not proof. This may be disappointing, but disappointment is not identity. This may reveal a limit in them. It does not automatically reveal a deficiency in me. Third, ask the controlling question. What here is actually within my control? Can I control whether they remember? No. Can I control whether they respond with depth? No. Can I control whether they interpret me well? No. Can I control whether they choose me, admire me, or make me central in their mind? No. Then ask the second half. Can I control how I interpret this? Yes. Can I control whether I betray myself for reassurance? Yes. Can I control whether I keep acting with dignity? Yes. Can I control whether I keep postponing my life, waiting for outer clarity? Yes. This question does not solve everything at once, but it brings you back to solid ground. Fourth, stop feeding the imaginary audience. When you catch yourself rehearsing conversations in your head, trying to manage what people might think, imagining criticism before action, or delaying a decision because unseen spectators may disapprove, name the pattern. Say to yourself, "This is the audience in my head. This is not reality. This is performance pressure. This is not principle." Do less explaining. Do less pre-defending. Do less image management. Do less emotional rehearsing. Instead, ask, what is the next right thing? Not the most admired thing. Not the least criticized thing. The right thing. Fifth, build a morning practice of inner direction. The morning is where many people lose themselves before the day even begins. They wake up and immediately drift outward. Who replied? Who noticed? Who didn't? What changed? What does it mean? That is how the day gets hijacked before it has even started. So, create a Stoic morning reset. Before you check other people, check yourself. Ask, what kind of mind do I want to keep today? Where will I place my energy? What is mine to do today? What must I not hand over to the moods of others? Keep it simple. 3 things may be enough. Today I will guard my judgment. Today I will act without begging for permission. Today I will not place my worth in unstable hands. 6th, create a sentence for emotional emergencies. When you are triggered, you do not always have time for a full philosophical reflection. That is why a short line helps. A line you can return to when the mind starts collapsing into old dependence. It can be something like, "This hurts, but it does not define me. Their attention is not my measure. I return to what is mine. I do not build identity from reaction. This is an appearance, not a verdict." The point is repetition. You are building a bridge back to self-command. 7th, practice doing good without demanding emotional payment. Many people do not only want to be kind, they want kindness to come back in a recognizable form. They want the care returned, the effort remembered, the loyalty matched, the emotional investment acknowledged. When that does not happen, bitterness grows fast. Seneca warns against making benefits transactional and argues that it is better to receive no return than to give no benefit at all. That does not mean becoming naive. It does not mean tolerating exploitation. It means this: do not give in order to secure your identity. Do not help in order to buy belonging. Do not love in order to force stability. Give because it is right. Help because it is aligned with your character. Care because you choose to care. And then keep your center. 8th, end the day with Stoic review. At night, before sleep, ask, where did I look for myself in other people today? Where did I hand away my peace? Where did I react too quickly to appearances? Where did I stay governed? Where did I choose dignity instead of dependence? Do not do this to punish yourself. Do it to train honesty, because change becomes real when it is noticed repeatedly. 9th, return to character whenever the mind wants attention. Every time the mind wants to ask, do they care? Do they remember? Do I still matter? Shift the question. Ask instead, how am I living? What kind of person am I being? Am I honest? Am I courageous? Am I fair? Am I measured? That is the Stoic return, from attention to character, from reaction to conduct, from emotional hunger to self-respect. 10th, let care be a gift, not a foundation. Do not become cold. Do not pretend you no longer value love, friendship, loyalty, or presence. Value them deeply, but value them as gifts, not as the flaw under your soul. When someone remembers, appreciate it. When someone listens, appreciate it. When someone stays, appreciate it. When someone follows up with sincerity, appreciate it, but do not build your existence on it. Because gifts can be received with gratitude, foundations cannot be allowed to shake. That is the real shift Stoicism offers. Not the end of affection, not the denial of loneliness, not the performance of being above human need, but a wiser order. Care is welcome. Love is welcome. Companionship is welcome, but your center must remain yours. So this is where everything becomes simple. Not easy, but simple. The day you realize that people are not thinking about you as much as you feared, not carrying you as deeply as you hoped, not organizing their lives around your existence the way your wounded mind once imagined, is not the day your life becomes smaller. It is the day it becomes clearer. Because from that moment on, you can no longer keep pretending that attention will save you. You can no longer keep building your peace on delayed replies, shifting moods, selective memory, or borrowed approval. You can no longer keep asking other people to hand you an identity that only your own character can form. And yes, there is pain in that. There is pain in seeing that many people are limited. Pain in seeing how much of your energy was spent performing. Pain in seeing how often you waited to be chosen instead of choosing your own life. Pain in seeing how often you confused being noticed with being valuable. But there is also freedom there. A real freedom. The freedom to stop rehearsing for invisible judges. The freedom to stop shrinking, so you can remain easy to hold. The freedom to stop begging silently for proof that you matter. The freedom to stop turning every silence into a verdict. And once that freedom begins, your life starts returning to you, quietly. You wake up, and your first thought no longer has to be about who texted, who remembered, who noticed, who cared enough, who changed, who stayed warm, who went cold. You wake up and ask a better question. How will I live today? Not how will I be received? Not how will I be perceived? Not how will I be validated? How will I live? That is a different kind of life. A steadier one, a cleaner one, a life with less theater in it. You begin to understand that your worth was never meant to be stored in the minds of distracted people. It was never meant to depend on whether others tracked your pain accurately. It was never meant to rise and fall with who remembered, who forgot, who followed up, who drifted, who praised, or who overlooked you. Your worth becomes visible in a different place, in the way you govern your mind, in the way you keep your word, in the way you endure disappointment without becoming ugly, in the way you act with courage when nobody is watching, in the way you remain fair, measured, and honest even after life has shown you how limited people can be. That is the deeper Stoic answer. Not that no one cares, not that love is fake, not that human connection is meaningless, but that your soul cannot be safely placed in unstable hands. So let people be human. Let them be limited. Let them be distracted. Let them misunderstand you sometimes. Let them fail to see what you hoped they would see. Let them forget what mattered more to you than it did to them. And then return. Return to your judgment. Return to your choices. Return to your discipline. Return to your character. Return to the small, strong center within you that does not need an audience in order to be real. That is where peace begins. Not in finally getting enough attention, but in no longer needing attention to confirm your existence. Not in becoming cold, but in becoming anchored. Not in withdrawing from life, but in stepping back into it without asking every passing person to tell you who you are. And maybe that is the real turning point. Maybe the most important change is not that you stop caring what they think. Maybe it is that you stop abandoning yourself while you wait to find out. So if this truth is entering your life right now, do not turn away from it. Do not make it bitter. Do not make it dramatic. Do not turn it into an excuse to harden your heart. Use it well. Use it to reclaim your time. Use it to reclaim your mind. Use it to reclaim your direction. Use it to reclaim the parts of yourself that were spent in waiting, performing, and asking to be emotionally assembled by other people. Because your life is still here, still waiting, still unfinished, still asking something of you. Not perfection, not applause, not constant confidence, only honesty, only courage, only the willingness to stop living for a crowd that was never really there. And if you can do that, even slowly, even imperfectly, then this painful realization becomes what it was always capable of becoming. Not the end of your story, the beginning of a more truthful one where you stop asking for permission to exist, one where you stop measuring yourself through unstable eyes, one where you stop living as a reflection in other people's minds and begin living as yourself. If this message found you at the right time, write in the comments, "I return to myself," because that is the shift. Not chasing the audience, not resenting the world, not waiting to be carried, returning to yourself. And from there, everything begins to change.